I'm going to be talking a little bit about security operations in general. So really the goal of this conversation is to kind of think about your security journey, right? Where you are today. Everyone in theory has some sort of SOC capability in their environment. It might be one person who has some ad hoc tasks that they produce or that they perform. It could be a team of people with sophisticated tools and technologies and policies and procedures, or anything in between that. Anything in that realm that's dedicated towards cybersecurity in theory, SOC in some way, right? So there's no magic bullet here. There's no single recipe for anybody. Really, the idea behind this session is to really think about concepts and ideas of how to just do that process wherever you are in that, right? Regardless of whether you've got a $10 million security budget or a $10,000 security budget, right? The goal here is really just think a little bit differently and think about how you do that with your overall security organization. So we're going to start by looking at a little bit of a history around SOC services and really just use this to inform the conversation. We'll then pivot to where we think we are today in terms of where customers are spending their time and energies on in the SOC realm. We'll look a little bit about what tomorrow can look like, and then have a conversation about how we can get ready for that next level of improvement or advancement of our SOC. So my name is Geoff Smith. I'm the practice director of our managed services division here at GreenPages. GreenPages does provide a set of security operations center services managed framework. So Michael here again, kind of concepts and ideas, things we're seeing customers doing, things we think customers should be thinking about, and then generate a conversation around that. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the SOC. So if you think back to the mid-90s, really SOCs didn't really exist, except for very specific situations, government areas, places like that. Most of your security operations center services were born out of the NOC. Everyone who had a NOC service capability, internal or external, they were asking their NOCs to basically provide some sort of security concept of what's going on, primarily looking at basic network traffic, alerts, firewalls, murder devices, things like that. We didn't really see a SOC concept until kind of the mid to end of the 90s, early 2000s. So a lot of this came around from Y2K, right? Y2K, big deal back in the day. Everyone really freaked out about it. Really started to create a different set of operational priorities. So started to see this concept of a SOC come up, and really it was looking at traditional tools, managing antivirus, managing IDS solutions, firewalls, things like that, right? As we move forward a little bit more into getting into the early 2000s, we started to expand the concept of SOC beyond just those security tool sets and start looking at concepts of vulnerability management, looking at stateful inspection, things of that nature, right? So as you can see, as we're progressing here, what we're really doing is we're just adding layers of capability to the SOC framework, primarily based around tools and technologies. Very reactive to what's going on. As we progress further, DLPs and the SOC start to come into the mix of kind of concepts and getting adopted. We start getting closer to current times. We start looking at user behavior. We start looking at, what's the effect of BYOD on this concept? Security, right? How do we handle things? Or we set up sandboxes. How do we handle things from a response perspective? And in the most recent time frame, right, we've been really looking at things like SOAR and EDR, cloud native security concepts and capabilities, right? So really, this is where we are today. And the real question is, what's it going to look like tomorrow, right? What's next? What should we be thinking about? So let's talk a little bit about that. Before we can talk about what we're going to do in terms of SOC and SOC innovation, we have to talk about what actually influences our innovation in SOC in the first place, right? So here's a couple of concepts. First and foremost, no big surprise here. Threats are evolving constantly, right? So obviously, as threats evolve, as new threats emerge, as new ways of having a bad day come around, right? SOCs are pivoting, they're responding, they're reacting, they're coming up with concepts and new ideas on how to prevent this. It's a big influence, obviously, in the way SOCs are constructed. Again, if we go back and look at progression of threats over the course of the last 20, 30 years, you can can see that SOCs have had a lot. They've had a lot of things to react to, respond to. A lot of the threats have come through. Zero-day threats, ransomware, all these kinds of things coming out, becoming more prevalent, becoming more important to pay attention to, and to have a way to maybe detect and or respond to those threats they are found. And in today's world, we think about recent supply chain attacks, right? So you're becoming vulnerable to partnerships with other entities, not even directly anymore, right? So you've got to really look at a broader landscape of your threat. Another innovation influence is budget, obviously, right? We can't just go out and spend money we don't have with our cybersecurity posture. So we have to look at what can we do with the money that we have? Where do we spend it? What are the priorities? We heard in the keynotes talking about big gaps, find your big gaps, address those big gaps, reduce your threat profile as much as you possibly can within what you have in the budget. You may not be able to solve everything, but solve the big things first, right? Sure, reduce your risks, right? So you can see over time, the obvious concept here is budgets have been fairly flat, but the threat itself and the cost of the threat, the cost to actually, manage this from a SOC perspective, gone up dramatically. So it's a challenge, right? We've got more work to do. We've got more things to protect. We've got more things to protect against, and yet we don't have a lot more money to do it, right? But when we don't do it, the impact has become more and more, of an issue, right? So the cost to the business of a breach has, skyrocketed, right? So these things, in theory, should allow you to go back to the business and get more money, right? So to be able to go back and say, this is why I need more budget, this is why I have to invest in the tools, maybe I have to bring on partnership, hire people. Because again, if I don't, the risk to the business is much higher and the cost of the business is much higher. So again, these are just influences that are really pushing the development of SOC services in our organizations that we should be paying attention to. Today's reality looks a little bit like this. From a challenge perspective, these are 4 things that I see that can prevent customers from being able to achieve some of their desired results from their SOC services. First and foremost, you've heard some of this talked about today, I think. When organizations go out and buy tools, they buy tools based on, at that point in time, they think is the best tool for that job, right? I have a need, I fill that need with a tool, and then they've got an investment. They've got to actually run that investment. You can't just throw that tool out because it's not as good as the next one that just came out. Or there's a new threat that tool doesn't cover. You've got to still work within your investments, things that you brought to the business, right? So we've got to deal with legacy and next-gen tooling to figure out how to make all that work together, right? Because you can't just completely greenfield the entire environment for all your tools done. Another thing we see that affects the ability of the SOC to be effective is early process human error. So what I mean by that is, think about it this way. We have today in most of our capabilities some level of automation, AI, ML functionality within a lot of the tool sets that we're using. But a lot of those things are really geared toward making the human work easy, right? If the humans are still operating at the very front of the process, very front of the workflow for security, errors at that point become exponentially more impactful down the road, right? So if you still have people looking at logs, you still have people doing manual correlation activity, things at that very beginning of that process, when and if they miss something, the impact is much bigger down the road. So again, a conversation here around where do we put the people and what are their roles? Where are they most effective? Unstructured data, lack of context to data, right? So we've got telemetry information from all these systems, all these platforms. We've got log data, we've got SIEM data, we've got antivirus and malware tools. We've got our SaaS applications and cloud applications. All this data needs to be collected, needs to make sense, and it needs to have context. So that's a big challenge because we don't necessarily control how that data is important, how it comes in, and what it looks like. And then in terms of what we do when there is an issue, when there's a problem, when there's an event, our policies Are they mature? Have we tested them? In a lot of cases, policy be written. They talk about tabletop exercise and the importance of running those things, right? Policies are written, but they're never really tested. They're tested once and then they just sit there and years go by and then they're not validated. We have to deal with those as well. So here are 4 things that I find that are pretty common challenges to the effectiveness of a SOC service. So how do we address them? Let's talk about tooling for a second. So every tool has a life cycle, right? You buy it, you implement it, you manage it and maintain it for its life cycle, and then at some point you're going to then replace that tool or platform with something new, right? Life cycles are going to vary depending on the industry you're in, the expense of the platform or system, how much of that platform system is tied into other systems, right? How much you've done in terms of development work around it, or APIs, integration, things of that nature. All of those things make some of these tools really, really difficult to pivot away from. They're not as effective as they used to be. So you really have to look at the cycle of the tools that you have available to you as a security operations team, right? And when do they deprecate? Sure, if there's a new known emerging threat that's coming out and you have a platform or tool that just can't address that and doesn't do it effectively, you might be able to go out and buy a new tool, right? And apply that to your environment and protect yourself from that threat. But now you're getting into tool sprawl. Now you've got all these different platforms out there with more data, with more unstructured, that's less content. So really the goal here is to understand what you have. When is it effect? How long is it going to be effective for, right? When can you actually just potentially replace it or pivot away to something better, right? Just understand the cycle. The other thing is a lot of these tools may not be in the control of the SOC. They may be used by the IT operations team, the NOC team, they might be tools used by application developers or platform people, right? So we may not have the ability as a SOC team to influence whether or not that tool or platform stays, or whether it goes, or whether it gets replaced. So we have to work around those challenges. Reliance by other functions within the business, right? So if you have a platform or tools that is used for patch management, as an example, right? There may be many different types of functions tied to that process. Identity management. So in those cases, you may have other considerations rather than just the effectiveness of that tool within the SOC function. They talked about it today, I think, in the keynote as well. You're going to have political and partnership issues, right? Some people will bring in a tool because that's what they like, what they're comfortable with, they'll invest in it. Those resources go away, you bring in new resources, and they have a totally different idea of what should be happening, right? So you've got to fight those battles. In some cases, that might be easy to overcome, right? And in other cases, that might be deeply embedded in the organization and take a long time to get past them. So do you want to spend your time fighting those battles, or do you want to, again, look at the big gaps? And then considering the relevance of today's needs. So, one of the things that I see that most customers will undergo is they'll invest in a platform or a tool. They'll optimize it for their environment. They'll get value out of it. And then at some point down the road, they just leave it there. It's just there. It's always been there. No one really knows exactly what it's there for, et cetera. How relevant is it going forward? So really inspecting and looking at that will help you determine whether or not you can make changes to your tools as part of your advancement SOC capability. Human dependence. We talked about human error early in the process. So we can't discount the fact that being in a SOC analyst, a SOC engineer, it's a difficult, challenging job, right? The high level of burnout, as we talked about, we heard about this morning, right? There's a lot of factors that go into having a appropriately staffed SOC service capability, right? You've got to look at the scale of the information that's coming into that SOC, how is it being processed, how many people have to get eyes on something to be comfortable with you understand what's going on, the repetitiveness of the tasks, which obviously lead to things like automation opportunity, that nature, right? Outside influences, we forget that our teams have personal lives, right? They've got things that they're trying to achieve in their careers. They've got things, dreams, goals, things of that nature. And if we're not cognizant of what those are, they'll attrit, they'll move on, they'll find something to do. So it's really important to do things like goals and benefits, making sure those are aligned throughout the organization. So, labor market forces, all of these things can impact your decision-making process around SOC. We have customers and partners that really leverage a lot of AI, a lot of automation in their capabilities and service delivery constructs to address this kind of challenge, right, at the human level. Some will tell you you really don't need humans in the process at all until the decision making actually has to happen. Others will say, I do think you need a gut check somewhere. It really matters somewhere in that process to ensure that whatever the machine is correct. My belief is that you need a nice blend. But again, put your focus of your people in the areas where they'll have the most value, they'll have the top license, they'll be happiest, they'll be the most productive. Challenges around data, right? So again, consistency in collection. Are you collecting all the information that you need, all the sources that are relevant? What do you do with that information collected? How is it portable? How much context can be applied to them, right? So I understand the data, or I understand I have the data, but do I understand what the data actually means? And what does it mean in my business where it might make some difference, right? Having that context really, really critical. How much validation do I need to spend on that data? How much overhead does it take for me to understand whether or not that data is the right information, leads to the right conclusions, provides the right visibility, right? So beyond the actual collection and analysis process of data, you need to spend some time going back and understanding on a regular basis, this is the right information. Will this help me, make my organization more secure? The long-term usability of data is key, right? So you might be collecting information that you don't really need to analyze until some event happens. Not hopefully never, but in the distant future, right? How long do I keep the data? How much information do I have? When does it not become usable? When is it not relevant? Then the order of importance. We get different types of information from different platforms and systems. We have to understand the priority of that, right? Some information might be more relevant in certain situations, certain things that are happening than others. Just understanding the importance of that data as well. So large scale problem, lots of information coming from lots of different sources, not overly contextually aware, with a lot of potential overhead associated. Policies. I think we all know that when we sit down and write a policy, whether it's an incident response policy or a patching policy or anything else associated with operations or security operations, we're doing our best to write what we think is the right way to do something. We're creating a process. We are validating that we believe this is the right way to address this challenge, right? But you're never going to know if that's going to work until you test it. You actually put it into effect, right? So this type of evolution of these objectives that you have around events and incident response, those are inputs to the policy. Those are going to change. They're going to change over time, right? As your business changes, business events happen. You go on new markets, you open up new product lines, you have different compliance levels that you might need to consider, right, for the course of time. As those things are happening, you've got to go back and look at the policy. You've got to make sure your policy is quality. Maintenance and testing fatigue. We have a person, kind of our lead policy internally here at GreenPages, and he gives policy sent to us like, hey, we have a new update. Check this out, read it, understand it. At some point you're just kind of checking the box, right? As somebody gets this repetitively, like, I'm sure they get it right. I'm sure they made the change, right? I'm not even questioning it. Just kind of walking back, right? If you get a little fatigued in that process, you can leave obviously yes, policy or the procedure being effective. The concept of RACI, everybody know what RACI is? It's pretty prevalent, right? So understanding policy and in your relationship with that policy, right? Am I responsible to do something? Am I accountable for this to be done correctly? Who do I need to talk to solve it at what points in terms of policy, right? Who needs to be informed so that they know what's going on? Those are really key steps. And when you build out a RACI framework, apply it to these policies and procedures, then at that point, you at least know who to go to. Who I go to when I need this information. Who should I be hearing from? You know, when this event happens, when this situation occurs. So having the RACI framework applied here is important understanding all the players. And again, that's going to change, right? How many people go, again, roles change, responsibilities change over time. These policies have to be able to address that. Concession and denial is kind of an interesting thing I found as I was looking at this. You know, a lot of people will look at something that they are, you know, kind of required to read, required to accept a policy or procedure, whatever it is, and they'll just by default just say, yeah, okay, great, I agree with this, not really knowing if they do, right? Or maybe not even considering their role, right? They're just trying to get through the process of acceptance and move on with their daily life, right? And then others will sit there in total denial. Like, I never saw that policy. I don't know anything about that policy. I never read that policy, you know, as a way to kind of explain maybe why they didn't follow it. So this comes in a lot when we start talking about user awareness activities for our user base, right? It's having, you know, this concept of whether or not someone has read policy, has applied policy, understands the policy. It's their responsibility once they've accepted it, right? Their responsibility to make sure they're right? And going from theory to practice, right? Again, when you create something like this, some sort of response policy to an incident or event, it's great to have it, but until you actually practice, do those tabletop exercises, make sure that you're fully aware of what it's like when you pressure, right? Get under stress, react. These policy challenges are certainly things we're dealing with, right? So we've got a lot of challenges in terms of our SOC capabilities, you know, advancing our SOC future, which takes us to tomorrow. So, by the way, I'm going to pause any questions. I'm going a little fast. Probably have a lot of time. So I really look at, again, thinking about SOC more as from a philosophical or kind of methodology approach. I really think there's three things that SOCs do. They need to know what's going on. They need to be effective and efficient in their processing of what's going on. And they need to do something. It's really three things, key architectural elements to every SOC, right? So they need to have security consciousness. They really need to understand everything that's going on in their environment that has any potential impact on their security posture, right? Which basically means they need to know just about everything that's going on inside the organization. They need to be plugged in at every level. We're talking about optimization of the process. We're talking about the scale of data, the lack of context, the multiple platform tools, all the challenges that a SOC has. You can't do this all in the backs of just people. You've got to have automation. You've got to have AI capabilities. You've got to marry those two things together. And really, when I think about those things, I think of the concept of bionic, right? You're all remember the bionic man, you know, 6 million man and all that, right? That he's building run faster, stronger, all these things. Still a guy, still human, but he's got this augmentation, this kind of like, you know, mechanical augmentation. Think of the SOC as the same way, right? It's still people in there making decisions, thinking about what has to be done, to give them everything that they need to do it more effectively, more efficiently. And then from a doings perspective, it's about doing what needs to get done in an immediate approach, right? So just knowing there's an event is one thing. Knowing the impact of that event is another thing. Knowing the priority of the steps that you need to take in order to respond to that event is totally other thing. So we've got to really focus on what we need to do right now to address this issue. The three components that I talked about. So as we dive into the kind of knowing component, which I call security consciousness, there's three components here. I love these things in briefs. Just everything is stuff. Ubiquitous visibility, holistic observability, and targeted awareness, right? And what do I mean by these? So for visibility, it's really about seeing everything everywhere, right? everything that can have an impact in terms of my risk profile, my security posture. I need to see everything. It's a big, big task, right? There was some discussion, I think it was this morning, talking about when you're looking at security services, one of the challenges is a lot of security services are structured on the amount of data, right? Data gets consumed. And the more data that goes into that service, the more expensive that service is. There's storage, compute, analyzing, processing data, right? Once you start tying cost to volume of information, people start looking for ways to reduce the amount of information. Right? Bad idea. Because once you start removing that information from the system knows less about what's going on. You're opening yourself up to potential vulnerabilities or challenges, right? So the concept for me is see everything everywhere. Anything that can be instrumented that has any potential impact to your security profile, you should really be pulling that into this SOC service capability, right? It's a pull process. It's very active. It's, the data comes in. It's going to be raw. It's going to be raw data. It's going to be very broad, right, across all these systems and platforms, obviously. And it's very state-based. What is happening right now? What's the information telling me is going on right now? So that's good. Gives you that first level of real consciousness, right? The second level is then to dive into that, and from an observability perspective, is to really get deeper into what it means, right? What does all this information mean? And isolate the things that are most important to you, right? So this is a little bit more about pushing information into the system, not just pulling everything in that you can, but pushing stuff in that gives you greater understanding of what might be going on. So think of things like, I've got a web-based application. I'm obviously monitoring it. I'm monitoring web services. I'm pulling in log data. I'm pulling all this information in through my SIEM tool and platform, right? That's the pull process. But that application has a certain performance expectation, right? So it runs it in a normal performance structure, has a nominal structure, kind of a nominal framework, right? Typically pulls about this much CPU, uses this much disk, uses this much RAM, et cetera. If the performance of that application changes abruptly, potentially a security issue that's going on, right? So you've got to potentially go in and understand that this platform, while it's still operating, right? There's no red flags necessarily that happen functionally. That small change in terms of application performance could be relevant for you, right? So you want to make sure you're going in and understanding where those trigger points are, and you're pulling that information in. Which is more of a sampling and focused approach, right? So you're really looking for the key indicators and trying to use those in your analysis. It's very evidence-driven. So you've got this kind of broad, see everything everywhere, pull everything into the service, and then you've got this concept of then isolating and observing more closely just the relevant elements of that. And then the next level of kind of awareness around focus and then magnifying that focus into specifically the areas that are really important. That is an event or problem, right? It's very intentional, very contextually based, really was really trying to find. So from a consciousness perspective, it's kind of three tiers. Bring everything into the system that you possibly can, isolate and observe everything that's really, really important, and then focus and magnify action the impact or ability to respond and or protect. From a processing perspective, obviously things like AI, ML, automation of the front end is very, very effective, right? But you still want that human contextual clue behind it. You still need people to go and understand what is the machine saying? What is it saying is going on? Is that right? Is it relevant? And then this will help, obviously, from a capacity perspective. So when I think about what the machine really can do, these are the areas that I really subscribe to machines, right? They can detect, they can log, they can correlate, they can prioritize. These are all things that we can teach the algorithms and the processing engines to do. Very codifiable, right? They can diagnose. In some cases, they can resolve through auto-healing, right? Self-healing capabilities, and they can close out the event. Where are the people in this process? They're really around defining all of this. for the machine, right? What are the parameters? What are the workflows? How is it going to happen? Aligning that to the business, clarifying and codifying it so the machine can take care of it. And then validation, evaluating, advocating, right? So all these things are human-based functions, aren't really our function. So the concept is we apply these together and we get this to an unlimited scale, right? The idea behind this really is as our data, as our telemetry information in our systems get more complex, type of cloud, we have more SaaS applications in the mix, as we have this, non-existent edge that we've been talking about, right? The edge doesn't exist anymore; it's everywhere. All of these things are going to lead to a scale for the SOC, and so we really needed to find a way to maximize our automation, machine-based collaboration, right? The other thing this does is actually check and balance, right? So obviously, we're not always going to trust every machine set, right? We're going to go in, we're going to validate, verify, we want to make sure that they made the right decision or it provided the right recommendation. So one of the things I like to look at, if you're working within a service or a platform that has these capabilities, this doesn't have the capability to do what it had just an observation. In other words, can I turn it on? Can I teach it what to do? Can I build the algorithm? Can I build the workflow? And then can I evaluate post, right? Before I turn it on in real life, right? So I'm really just understanding if it's making the right call. It's giving me the right information. If it's diving into that. One of the other benefits of this is something we call top of license. So going back to the human factor of our SOCs, right? We all know that it's really difficult to hire security people. It's difficult to keep security people. It's difficult to keep them engaged, them happy, right? One way to help do that is not ask them to do things that they think are below their station or below their capabilities, right? You don't want them in the mud, right? You want them doing the things that they want to be excited about because then they're going to be happiest. They're going to stick around the longest. You're going to have that long-term attention. So this really helps by removing a lot of the really dirty work from the staff, right? And allowing that either at a service level or again at a platform. From a response perspective, right? So I really like the concept of solve and evolve, right? So at some point you're going to figure out how to solve that problem. Some issue has been detected, some event has happened, you've had a response to that event, you've solved that event, right? Great, you did your job. Job's not over. Now you've got to evolve and figure out what happens next time something like this happens. Can I solve it better? Can I solve it faster? Can I give you more response, right? So solve and evolve. Turn those threats into opportunity. I think we heard this in the first keynote session yesterday. Every time there's a threat or event or something happens in your environment, absolutely do the work to solve it, do the work to fix it, address it, but then go back and think about it and learn it, right? Turn it into an opportunity, right? To either do a better job or to potentially solicit more funding for security operations in the future, right? So use those as opportunities and then really go from defense to offense as much as you possibly can. So this is really, again, about freeing up those resources. They can go out and learn about the new and emerging threats, the new emerging ways to provide security services. So again, solve and evolve. It's all about capturing all the information in the process. It's about remediating the problem, obviously, right? But then it's, what is the content that I can pull from this process that's helpful? Did we perform at the level necessary? How did leadership feel about how, right? Are they on board with what they're happy with that, right? And then evolving either it's process or it's a tool or it's people, right? Skilling up people to do better next. Again, turning your threats into opportunities and then moving from from defense to offense. So we just talked about really kind of the challenge we're facing today, right, around SOC services. And I was working this presentation and I sent it to one of my colleagues and he said to me, if there's one thing, security professional, he said, if there's one thing that I would say to people today is don't try and put all of this on. It's too big a problem. You've got to build partnerships. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So let's talk about that. So you have a SOC, we talked about it. Even if you have one person who spends 50% of their time on security, right, and works on security events and sort of patch management, or whatever other function there. You have a SOC function somewhere in the organization, right? Or you've got a partner who does it for you, right? But you've got to have a strategy. You need to start with a strategy as to what's appropriate for my organization, my budget, for our needs. You have to build that strategy out. And then around that strategy is going to be your security team. Now, that could be all internal people, could be partnerships, external partnerships, et cetera. So I really look at this as kind of 3 areas of partnership that's available to you in terms of building out and maintaining and managing the SOC. You've got external partnerships, could be, again, platform providers, tools, platform, things like that that you consume. You've got industry partners, people that work in the same industry that you, user groups, forums, all those kinds of things. And then you've got partners inside the organization. And don't forget about those partners, because they can probably be, in some cases, the most helpful people. I'm going to build this out because, that was horrible. Can you actually read that in? I don't know if you can read that back. Bad color choice on my part. But the idea here is each of these partners, there are areas within your kind of SOC framework where they're most or can be most effective. So let's start with the external partners. So things like your SIEM platform, your core SOC monitoring service capability, something very, very common and very well-defined today that can be easily outsourced to partnership, right? Your MDR capabilities, managing your risk, doing vulnerability scanning, things like that, audits and doing security auditing, right, through external partnerships, right? And then advisory services, both of them advisory services. So there's a breadth of vendors and partners that can do all this work for you, right? Trust but verify, as we talked about earlier in the session. But these are great targets for you to remove from your SOC, from your security, and have your security team be a consumer of those partnerships, right? When we talk about industry partnerships, we're really talking about things like, common, forums, community service, community groups, and things like that within your industry. Affiliations you may have, sister companies, industry groups you work with, right? Your cybersecurity and your cyber insurance partners, vendors, right? They can be a source of information for you, assistance. Working with your application vendors, specifically around your line of business application, right? So if you're in a particular industry, healthcare industry, your EMR vendor, right? You should be working very, very closely with them. Think of them as part of your cybersecurity strategy. And then cloud and SaaS providers, right? Whether you're heavily leveraged in this space or not, we all know this is a prime vector for security challenges. So you want to work closely with your cloud and SaaS providers to make sure that you understand what they're going to do and what they can do. And internally, some of them are obvious, right? Your IT, your operations teams, things like that. Your C-suite, your board, all these people have to be involved. A lot of people forget these, right? Now we think about users as a threat vector, right? That's what we think of them as. They're going to behave badly. They're going to do things that are going to compromise the organization potentially. What we don't think about is them as a source of partnership, right? So there was discussion, I think, in the first session about the carrot and the stick, right? And I thought it was interesting because I'm a little bit more of a stick guy myself, but I understand the value of the carrot, right? For me, users typically look at security policies, procedures, solutions as barriers to their productivity. That's the way they, right? They're going to look for ways around it. They're going to look for ways to do things differently because it's just easier for them. So yes, they need to sign the acceptable use policy. Yes, they need to, agree to doing all these things, and there need to be consequences if they're not, right? But I love the concept of having some level of, I don't know if I would say a reward, but maybe just more recognition.
Does it better than me.
Yeah.
And for them, they're offering work virtual coin or whatever it is to be able to get a different character or whatever. But by changing that to a positive, giving incentives to go do
Right.
it.
Yeah, and I think I love the concept because in my view, as a user myself, right, I do feel like if I do everything exactly right, and you know, I do all my training and I get it done on time and I score well on my training and everything else, and then I don't hear anything about security for the next 3 months, and then the company comes back and asks me more, right? I want to get a little something out of that. I want to get something for that, right? And you know, I know a lot of the security awareness training, you know, solutions and technologies out there do a very, very good job of tracking this up, right? So the information's there. Let's use it, right? Let's highlight those people. Put them on your internal, you know, intranet site. Say, you know, our security, our top security, you know, exactly, right? Promote it a little bit. Make it seem you know, in the managed services space, when we a number of years ago, it's a little off topic, but we rolled out a new framework for our service desk organization called KCS, Knowledge Centers. That's what it stands for. And basically, the concept there is it's a solve and evolve concept. You know, you're solving issues for users. You're using known information to solve it. You're going to go back and rate that information to see how well it worked, right? So that's what we're asking you to do as a technician. When all the technician really wants to do is move on to answer the next call. So we gamified it, right? Badges, awards, things like that. We promoted that process. I think it's the same in security, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the whole grassroots of that. You can get people behind it, you can get buy-in. You're going to have a whole lot better and easier time to implementation than if you got people fighting. And you know, I won't say I have all of the ways to do it. I just always see we're beating them up, Why haven't you done your security training? We need to be doing your security training. And it's the other side that if we could get to and have, I like the idea this morning of, you know, coming up with badges or whatever it is, coming up with some way of incentivizing and recognition.
Yeah, I really like it. I mean, to me, it's, you know, if it promotes more compliance, if it promotes more interest in participating, it's a good thing, right? I mean, because again, from a security perspective, it only takes one, right? So the more that we can get people involved and enrolled, I think it's great. But we really need to look at our user community as a partner in this process, right? Because we're heavily reliant on them in order to be successful, right? And they also should understand, you know, when and if there are events and incidents that are occurring, you know, what to expect, right? You know, what kind of impact might happen, how they can help. So how do we get ready for kind of the next iteration of SOC, right? So I think you saw this on one of the slides on the first keynote structure. GreenPages organizationally has adopted this concept of assess, modernize, and AMM, right? So everything that we're bringing to our customers from a services perspective is built around this idea. And when we apply this to a SOC modernization journey, here's what I think of. First and foremost, we need to assess our current state, obviously. Right? We need to understand where we are today, what are we able to do, what are we not able to do, before we can decide how we want to improve and modernize our SOC capability. I always like to start with talent. Me, it's the people. Start with the people first. And I think the gentleman from the NFL was talking about this a bit in his digital transformation conversation. I really like it. It's like technology will come, process will come. You figure all that out, but until you figure the people part out, none of that might ever happen. Or if it does happen, it might not get adopted, and if it doesn't get adopted, right? So start with the people. Understand what motivates them. Understand their skill what they're skilled at, what they're not skilled at, right? Understand, you know, how dedicated they are, right, to the team, to the organization. Really understanding the people is going to set the baseline for SOC. And then look at the techniques, right? Are they effective? Are they efficient? Are they agile? Are they optimized? Right? talked about with the ability to automate a lot of things. Are they aligned to the business outcome? Business outcomes are going to change over, right? So we have to continue to go back and processes and these techniques and make sure they're aligned. And are they codifiable? Can I actually take this entire technique, turn it into code, and hand it? And if I can, great. Then I can take these people over here that might be overworked or not working at top of license and give them something more interesting. And then from a technology perspective, do I have what I have? Is it sufficient? Is it versatile? Do I have the ability to take this tool, this platform, this capability as part of my SOC function and use it for other things? Or can I combine it with other tools and platforms and get a better result? Is it cost effective still? Is it still deriving the same amount of value as it used to? And then how supportable is it, right? We all know these things have lifespans. At some point in time, they become probably more costly to manage and maintain than they do. Then look at your abilities within the SOC, right? Look at the structure of the SOC, look at its capabilities and its outcomes. Really, again, going back to this concept of an ecosystem of partnership, right? What should I do internally versus what can I do, right? What's the best blend for my organization, right? And that's going to be different for everybody. Some organizations, you really feel like outsourcing is the way to go. A lot of people feel co-sourcing is the better one, right? Others feel like I'm going to do everything internally because I don't trust anybody else to do it, right? So you've got to look at that and really determine for your SOC what's that structure look like. And again, balancing the automated and manual processes. And then what do I need to own and what can I consume, right? So, if I don't need to own it, I shouldn't try to own it, just, right? I'm not trying to empire build. I'm not trying to, create this structure internally. Results, methods, and features, right? So again, from a capabilities perspective, am I getting the right results from my current structure? Or where in my structure am I not getting the results I want, even though other parts of the SOC capability are there? The methods that are being used, are they current? Are they updated? Are we looking at these things on a regular basis? And what features and capabilities am I delivering to the organization, right? Again, thinking about things like further things of that nature. From an outcomes perspective, what's my mission, right? Everyone should have a mission statement. Every team should have a mission statement. Everyone should understand what they're trying to achieve globally within the organization. What kind of commitments can I deliver to the organization from my current capability and or my planned capability, and what's the gap there? Am I trying to reduce my SLAs in terms of responsiveness? Am I trying to reduce the amount of time it takes me to respond to certain levels of events of that nature? What kind of SLAs and SLOs can I actually do? So these kind of components will help you address your current state and understand where you need to go. And again, it's about ownership and accountability, going back to that basic construct, right? One of the things that I think is important to understand is that organizationally across both your internal, your external, and your industry-based partnerships is that you really want to make sure that you've got the ability to share the benefits where it makes sense, right? So if you're able to leverage your external partners to deliver a better outcome, that's something that should benefit your internal teams, right? They should be able to see the benefit of that. You want this to be modular and extensible, right? But you also want it to be agnostic. So one of the key things here from a security and SOC capability is SOCs are not necessarily going to be making the decisions of what platforms and systems companies will sign up for, right? We have to adapt to what the organization is, right? They're going to go out with cloud-based services, SaaS, technology experts. We may not be in that conversation as a SOC team, right? We need to be able to understand that whatever the decision is, I need to be agnostic to the ability to actually help support that from the security perspective. Governance is key, obviously, right? So we want to understand how we're doing. We want to understand how we can report to the business on how we're doing. We want that to be bi-directional. We want the business to come back to us and say, we think, we feel better about our security posture. Users, going back to the user conversation, right? We want to get input from the user. You roll out an MFA solution, how effective is this burden? Talk to the user base, understand what their perspectives are. You may not be able to change anything, right? But and they feel like they're involved in the process, they'll be more compliant. And then becoming predictive is down. So going a little faster, we're down to 5 minutes. So what's next, right? Well, kind of up to you, right? Everybody's in a different state. Everybody's in a different situation in terms of how much investment they have to make, how much investment they can make, what their current structures are, their platforms, their tools, their people, right? Their technology in space. What are you going to do? It's up to you. But we're here to help, right? That's what we're here for. So if you're challenged in this area, if you feel like you'd like to have a conversation, we have a number of resources available to you in our security operations teams. We have a lot of these partners. There are going to be a lot of them down the expo, right? That have service in this space. You know where to find us, right? So if you need help, come to us and check out our partners, right? So when you're down in the partner expo, take a look at the organizations that we're working with. There's some great partnerships there. Talk to them, find out what they're doing for their customers, how their customers are getting value from their service offering, and just think about how it might plug into your model. Right? So that's it. 3.5 minutes left. Question? Awesome. Thank you.